In this video, we'll be exploring dietary choices, lifestyle choices, and how these affect your individual health, with a focus on a few specific conditions that individuals might have, which could require unique dietary restrictions. So here we have four categories of what are called essential nutrients. Essential meaning we have to get them from our diet. We can't produce them on our own. So those would be minerals, vitamins for the most part, essential fatty acids, and essential amino acids. So of these four essential nutrients, remember that these top two here, vitamins and minerals, we need in only very, very small amounts, and they don't actually provide any usable energy to the body, yet they still are essential for proper functioning in terms of different reactions that occur, and also structural components like iron, calcium, etc., making up various parts of our body. Essential fatty acids play roles in different lipid-based molecules that our body needs to make. One of those is important for proper brain development, for example. And over here, essential amino acids, well, remember, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. And so in order to build that diversity of the thousands and thousands of different kinds of proteins we have in the body, we need to obtain all of the building blocks. Some of those our body can make, others, these essential ones, it cannot. And so we're going to be focusing now on proteins for a little bit, so not the amino acids per se, but how to evaluate protein sources and determine which protein source, if any, is better or healthier than another one. So in terms of the actual protein itself, proteins are more or less equivalent. Yes, there's such a thing as complete versus incomplete proteins. However, if you're eating a decently balanced diet, that's not really an issue in terms of the amino acid composition. What is an issue, though, is what's packaged with the protein. So there are different considerations, different things you want to look for. One of those is check to see, is there a lot of salt coming along with that protein? So things like ham, bacon, salami, all these like cured meats are often very, very, very high in salt. Even other things like canned beans, which would be a good protein source, things that are canned are typically very, very high in sodium as well. This number here, 130% RDA. RDA is short for recommended daily allowance. You don't necessarily need to know that, or for this class you don't, but you can think of it as being almost equivalent to percent daily value, a term we'd introduced before talking about a nutrition facts label. So we said for the bad things like sodium, you want to limit your intake to no more than 100%. So here we've exceeded it by eating just a 6-ounce, less than half a pound, piece of ham. Additionally, you want to look at what kind of fats are there. Are the fats that are there healthy fats? Are they unsaturated fats? Or are they saturated or things called trans fats? And so here we've got a porterhouse steak, which has a good amount of protein in it, but it also has a lot of saturated fat, 12 grams, which is over 60% of what you're allowed for the entire day. So trying to cut out some of that saturated fat, because remember, saturated fat, when it gets processed by our liver, is the main source of the bad cholesterol, the LDL, that can tend to stick in the walls of our arteries and reduce blood flow, leading to potentially heart attacks, stroke, or other cardiovascular problems. A better choice than a steak would be to have some fish. So here we've got some wild salmon, almost equivalent, 34 grams of protein, a little bit less, but pretty close to 40. It's very low in sodium naturally, and it's got almost no saturated fat. Because remember, as far as animals go, most animals have their fat stored as saturated fat, but fish are kind of an exception to that. They've got more of the unsaturated fats, the fish oils. And the last thing to look for also is actually a good thing. Is there any fiber present? Remember, fiber is good for us. It provides no calories, but it's important for a variety of other functions in the body. And so we've got some lentils. They're a little hard to see in this picture. you're not familiar with them, they're kind of like tiny little beans almost, but they're more perfectly round shaped and much smaller. But you cook them up. They're commonly used in Indian food dishes and many others as well. But they're very healthy. They've got a decent amount of protein. You can see here not as much as salmon or steak does, but a lot of fiber, good for your health, and basically no fat or sodium. So that's a good option for a protein source. Another thing that we've recently begun to realize is that red meat, red meat is mainly cow, so beef, but it could be other things like lamb, or even certain cuts of pork. Not really red meat, but under this category. And we've been found that this increases your chance of death, of mortality later on in life. So people who eat more red meat have a greater chance of dying. And it's even more increased if the red meat is processed. So processed would mean it is preserved, salted, cured, smoked. So you can see here processed meat like bacon, salami, sausage, bologna, etc., pepperoni. This increases your chance of dying by 20% versus somebody who doesn't eat that. Unprocessed red meat, like a fresh steak, fresh hamburger, etc., still increases your chance of death by 13% compared to somebody who doesn't eat that. Eating these other things over here reduces your chance of death. And so it's best to try to limit our red meat consumption. And the way that this increases your chance of mortality is because there's a lot more saturated fat here. And also processed red meat has certain compounds that are cancer causing. And so that can lead to a variety of problems here: heart disease, stroke, cancer, type 2 diabetes. We'll talk about diabetes type 1 versus type 2 in a future topic related to homeostasis. And then the last thing about red meat I'll mention, or just meat in general, is that the way that you prepare the meat actually makes a difference. So whenever you cook meat at very high temperatures, so grilling, or maybe even broiling meat in an oven, like 500 degrees or higher, it creates cancer-causing compounds in the meat by that high temperature cooking. Something like frying on the stove or cooking in the oven normally, that wouldn't do that. But high temperature cooking like grilling does. And so grilling should be done in moderation. I know that a lot of us love to grill in the summer, but don't do it every week. Try to cut back and do it, maybe every couple of weeks or once a month or something like that. Just, reduce your chance of developing cancer and things like that. So obviously, everything we do has some risk associated with it. So you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons, but moderation is usually key. So here we've got gluten. I'm sure you've all heard about gluten. Gluten-free stuff is all around us. And you might be thinking, well, we were just talking about proteins. What's gluten have to do with that? Well, gluten actually is a protein. Despite the fact that this picture is all showing pasta and bread, foods that we think of being very high in carbohydrates, which they are, they also contain this protein, gluten. So we don't need to know all these details over here. Just know that gluten is a protein. Okay. Don't worry about what part of the kernel it's in or anything like that. Gluten's a protein. And you can see there's a number of different sources of gluten. The only one I'll ask you to know for testing purposes is the one in bold, wheat. Wheat is the main source of gluten, the main trouble source for some individuals. But you can see other things, different kind of products made of parts of wheat or derivatives of it: rye, barley, malt, brewer's yeast. But wheat is the one we'll focus on. You may or may not have heard of celiac disease. Celiac disease is what we call an autoimmune disease. Auto means self. So it's self-immune, where you're attacking your own body, Your immune system is attacking your own healthy cells by mistake. And celiac disease is triggered by consuming gluten. So you might think, oh my gosh, I should not eat gluten. I don't want to develop this. Well, there are other things that must be sort of present in order to develop celiac disease. So besides over here having gluten being the trigger, you also must have certain genetics, a genetic predisposition that then makes it more likely for you to develop this response to gluten that's abnormal. And also a certain physiological difference where you've got like a leaky small intestine where these junctions between cells aren't as tight as normal. Collectively, these three things can lead to celiac disease. And celiac disease, when it happens, leads to this permanent damage of your small intestine. And your small intestine, like we learned, is so important to absorbing nutrients and digesting food that if this gets damaged, you can have real trouble getting enough nutrients to keep yourself healthy. So in this case, your immune system thinks these little protrusions in your intestine, called villi, little finger-like projections, it thinks that these shouldn't be there, and it begins to attack them and destroy them. And if those are destroyed, well, now these nutrients can't be absorbed as well as they were in the past. And so it's a really big problem. So individuals who do have celiac disease should not eat gluten ever. It's very bad for their health due to their abnormal immune response or their inappropriate immune response. And celiac disease in the United States is, relatively common. 1 in 133 people have it. That's about 3 million people in the population. Additionally, there are some individuals that have an allergy to wheat, either gluten or some of the other products in wheat that are not related to gluten. A wheat allergy is more irritating. It doesn't lead to permanent damage. However, some allergies can become severe, so there's a possibility of big problems with that. And there's something else called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. You don't need to know this. We just need to know the celiac disease. But we're not really sure exactly what the trigger is. It's something in wheat, but we don't know what it is. However, even factoring all of these in, it's still the minority of the population that has one of these conditions. And for these individuals, trying to cut back on wheat, or for sure for celiac, no gluten at all, is going to be good. Question is, though, what about the rest of us, the majority of the population? Is gluten-free something we should all try to do? Would it help the average person who doesn't have one of those conditions? Well, the answer is actually no. A gluten-free diet is probably not best for everyone, and here's why. Gluten-free does not mean healthy, despite the fact that many companies want you to equate gluten-free with better health. Gluten-free diet can be very low in vitamins, minerals, and fiber. It can be much worse for you because products that contained gluten oftentimes were whole grains and had a lot of good stuff in them. And so you can potentially have a deficiency in those. Additionally, gluten-free foods can have lots of additives and sodium and sugar and preservatives in them, just like any other food. It doesn't mean it's healthy. And gluten is just a protein, right? We eat proteins all the time. We don't vilify other proteins. It's just because there are some individuals who do have this, abnormal reaction to it, doesn't mean it's bad for the rest of us. So just like peanuts, right? Yeah, some people with a peanut allergy don't eat peanuts. But for the rest of us, peanuts aren't bad for your health. Peanuts are just like, any other food. Same thing with gluten. To wrap this up here, let's go through some recommendations for healthy living, talking about eating and also lifestyle recommendations. So they always say eating a balanced diet. We'll focus more on that on the next slide in terms of how much of each type of food product you want to get. Primarily, you want to try to have more plant products, less animal products to boost your health. So lots of fruits and vegetables. For protein sources, you should try to have more of those that are low in fat. And so fish, other lean protein sources, like there's plant proteins we'll talk about. And then reduce your consumption of these nutrient-poor foods, so saturated fat, trans fat, sodium, red meat, desserts, alcohol, etc. This could be a little bit small, especially if you're listening to this on your phone, but you're definitely going to want to be very familiar with this table, so make sure you get a big enough screen to look at it, maybe print off a screenshot of it or something like that. But this is what's called, so I can write it somewhere here, My Plate, MYPLATE. And it's a relatively new government way to determine what kind of things you should have on your plate and how much of each you should consume. So you can see over here on the left, about half your plate should consist of fruits and vegetables. Let's talk about fruits first. When we're talking about fruits, it says to focus on whole fruits. What that means is not so much fruit juice. Fruit juice takes away most of the benefits of fruit. Yeah, it might have some vitamins and minerals in it, but you've lost all the fiber, you've lost some of the other things as well in the processing. So whole fruits is best. Fresh, frozen, dried, canned, as long as they're not canned in like syrup. If they're canned in 100% juice, that's good. And fruit makes a good substitute for other just sugar-laden desserts, or as a good snack, especially because it can provide some sugar for a little bit of a boost, but also fiber and vitamins and minerals. So about a fourth of your plate should be fruits. Another fourth should be vegetables. For vegetables, you should have a variety of colors. You might wonder, why do the colors matter? Well, each color usually signifies there's some different vitamins or different minerals that are present in there. And so by eating a variety of colors, you're more likely to get the vitamins and minerals you need. Additionally, preparing vegetables in a variety of ways is beneficial because some vegetables you get more nutrition raw, some you get more when they're cooked. And so prepare them in a variety of ways and then you'll be fine. Up here, grains, about a fourth of your plate. Try to make at least half of your grains whole grains. That's a key phrase there, whole grains. Whole wheat doesn't mean whole grains. You gotta see whole grains specifically. Good options for whole grain foods are oatmeal, whole grain bread, brown rice, but also popcorn. Popcorn is actually very healthy for you. When we're talking about popcorn being healthy, though, it's not popcorn where you go to the theater and there's this artificial butter, you pour a pound on it and salt it heavily and, that kind of stuff. We're talking about plain popcorn. Plain popcorn is very healthy for you. It's a whole grain, low calories, lots of fiber, and so those are good options to consume. Brown rice versus white rice, much better. Same thing with the whole grain bread. Again, cut back on these sugar and fat-laden desserts. Easier said than done, right? I'm a big sucker for cookies and desserts and stuff like that, but moderation is key. And down here, about a fourth of your plate should be protein. I have a variety of proteins, again, mostly lean proteins, so you can have seafood products, fish, beans, peas. Nuts and seeds are also good, even though they're relatively high in fat. They're high in the good fat, the unsaturated fat. Soy products, eggs are actually pretty good for you. Lean meats, poultry, and things like that. So that's filled up our plate. Everything else off the plate means to just have not a lot of it. Have it in moderation. So dairy. We don't necessarily need to have dairy to be healthy. You do need to get calcium, but you can get calcium through actually vegetables, and we have calcium also in various fortified things like flour, or milk, I guess, that provides, well, milk's dairy. Sorry about that. But in our flour, we've got it fortified with iron, so I meant to say, and so that's a source of that. But anyway, you don't have to eat dairy. If you do eat dairy, try to choose the lower fat or reduced fat options for those things, and also that holds true for cheese as well. And then down here, butter, so saturated fats, added sugars, sodium. try to reduce those as much as possible. If you're trying to lose weight and you drink soda, cutting that out of your diet is one easy way to try to save some calories. So try and drink water or sparkling water instead of sugary drinks. Maintaining proper hydration is good for overall body health. Easy way to tell if you're drinking enough water is to look at your urine. It should be a very, very pale yellow color. If it's darker than that, you need to drink more water. Not skipping breakfast. You may have heard breakfast is the most important meal of the day. There's actually some truth to that. So when you wake up in the morning, getting some energy and some sugar for your brain is actually very important for proper brain functioning. When we're saying sugar, we're not talking about, again, just eating donuts and pastries and things like that, but have some fruit or have some piece of toast or yogurt or things like that where the sugar is integrated in and it's not just sugar and fat. Obviously, trying to maintain healthy weight. It's not really extremely easy to determine what that healthy weight exactly is. We'll talk about later a possible measurement of healthy weights. So to do that, you want to make sure you're staying active. You're using up as many calories as you take in or more. The general recommendation is every week, 150 minutes of moderate physical activity. That ends up being, 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week. It's actually not that hard to do. It's easy to make excuses, right? Believe me. But that's what you want to try to aim for, at least 150 minutes a week of moderate physical activity or 75 minutes of vigorous physical activity, or combinations every week. So moderate physical activity is something like, walking quickly, for example. Vigorous could be something like, playing full court basketball, or, swimming. That's very vigorous activity. With exercise, it's important not only to get your heart rate up, that's the exercise that's cardiovascular, so, running, dancing, things like that, but also to do some muscle building exercises. That's especially important as individuals age because what happens is when you use your muscles, they pull on your bones and cause your bones to thicken. And that's beneficial because it reduces the chance of having broken bones as you get older. Additionally, the more muscle you have on your body, the easier it is to maintain a healthy weight because muscle is going to use more energy than fat to maintain that muscle. Managing stress. You can see here I didn't say getting rid of stress because unfortunately for most of us that's not possible, but managing it, deciding how you respond to stress. So if you decide, I'm stressed out, I'm going to go, indulge in 6 adult beverages, you know what I mean? That might not be the best way to handle stress, right? Instead, it could be something like going for a long walk or meditating or listening to some music, different things like that. Stress has so many terrible effects on our body. It suppresses our immune system. It increases these hormones in your body that lead to stress responses that can lead to damage to your blood vessels. It's really not a good thing. Avoiding exposure to smoke of any kind. Directly, secondhand, there's also what's called third-hand smoke, where basically the smoke gets into like the upholstery, the bedding, the clothing, the carpet, etc. And so avoiding that is important for your overall health because smoke has been shown to increase your chance of cancer and heart disease and things like that. All right, that finishes up this talk.